This podcast is made possible by Planful.
Hello, this is Steve Vince, CFO of Tenable, and you're listening to the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 837.
Being a nonprofit organization, we should be raising money, we should getting contributions, we should be soliciting donors. And that has been the shift of the organization in the past couple years. We are, one of our mottos is building a culture of philanthropy. Because with that, with our brand and being able to raise money, we can tell our donors that 100% of your contribution goes to programmatic work. You know, we tout ourselves on using the power of science, exploration, education, and storytelling.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's episode, we speak with Rob Young, CFO of National Geographic Society. Back in 2001, when Rob Young joined the incoming class of newly minted accountants at KPMG, he recalls there being a 5 to 6 year age difference between his KPMG classmates and himself. For his part, Young, a father of two, who had already invested 4 years of his professional life as a construction journeyman, a career Young had expected to pursue until he makes a lasting impression on a night school professor. That professor, Young today credits as being the most consequential mentor of his finance career. You'll hear that story and much more after this. With so much change around us and your need for increasing agility, you have to equip your team to win, and you have to do it now. Join over 1,300 companies of all sizes using Planful to help plan and execute with greater confidence. Planful integrates your critical financial processes to serve the data you need, insights you demand, and the answers necessary to manage your business optimally. Planful lets you plan better, close faster, and report more accurately. And Planful's not just for finance and accounting. It's for the entire business to plan, collaborate, and drive increased financial performance. Take full control of how you administer and manage all of your financial processes and data. And put finance first collaboration at the heart of every decision. When finance is a team sport, you can be a champion. With Planful, you'll be a champion of finance. Get in the game by going to planful.com to learn more. Hello, we're speaking with Rob Young, CFO of the National Geographic Society. Rob, welcome.
Hi, Jack. Thanks for having me.
So, Rob, we always begin with this one question where we ask our CFO guests to look back for us. Share with us some of those experiences that you feel prepared you for this role, the CFO role.
Wow, Jack. I think my experience is probably a lot different than your typical CFO. I actually started my career in construction. I spent 4 years in construction out of high school while I was going to school at night, trying to get my 2-year degree. So I worked from an apprentice and became a journeyman. So I was actually leading projects early on in my career.
What geography are you in, Rob, at that point in your life? Where are you living?
In Jersey, born and raised in Jersey. So all this happens in New Jersey or New York, right? You know, I was in the union at the time. And so that taught me a lot of lessons about being a leader and learning different people's attitudes and how to get people motivated. From there, I actually took a downturn in terms of salary to become a business plan writer. So for a year, I wrote business plans for small businesses for the Small Business Administration.
Now that's an interesting segue. Were you always entrepreneurial in some way, or what points you that direction all of a sudden?
So as I'm going through school, one of my professors was telling me you might want to start getting some office type of experience to go along with the education. So he knew somebody. Another faculty was looking for somebody to help write business plans for them. So it wasn't my business. I went to work for someone. And
Why did he think you were capable? I mean, you've got this background. You're in construction. You mentioned. Why would he? Okay, I got just the guy for a business plan for you. Why? Did you already have an aptitude? Were you already demonstrating some numbers savvy?
yeah, I mean, this was one of my accounting professors. So a bulk of the business plan is the financial modeling of the potential revenues, expenses, and things like that. The actual writing of the business plan is we kind of use templates and things like that. It's a laundromat. All laundromats are laundromats, but it's where it's located. What is the competitors around? What does the population look like? And then you develop models, revenue models based on that. You package it up, you give it to the customer, they go to the Small Business Administration, and you hope they get approved for a loan.
Did you enjoy it? I mean, whether it's a moment where you're like smitten, suddenly you're like, hey, this was kind of interesting, or
Yeah, it was definitely interesting. It was different. For one, sitting down at a computer working all day was a big change. But the fact that I was able to create models and show different scenarios of the business, becoming profitable after, year 3 or year 2.
Is this your first Excel experience? You started using Excel and you got the hang of it, sounds like, yeah.
Right. And that was like the office, getting that office kind of mentality, going in, dressing differently, Like I said, I was going to school at night. It took me a few years to finish my 2-year degree, going class by class. Ultimately finished, got a scholarship to Rutgers to go get my bachelor's degree. But the caveat there was I had to go full time. And at the time, I had a full-time job during the day. I was married and I had 2 kids. And so it was like, okay, go part-time and pay myself and take another 6 years to finish, or go full-time, basically block out the outside world and get it done. So I did that, sat for the CPA exam right after college, finishing, took the exam, passed the whole exam, one shot. And then I went to work at KPMG in Short Hills, New Jersey. Now, the caveat with that was when coming into the role, I'm, I think, 27, 28 years old, where everyone else is 22, 21, 22. So that was life-changing in itself, going into an organization where, a 23-year-old's, telling me what to do, and had more experience than me, and on a role, 23, 24-year-olds. So that was somewhat humbling, but it also taught me, how to manage up, right, in some aspects. So that was a life lesson. Taught me a lot about leadership. And then from there, I just progressed through different organizations and made sure every stop I made, I progressed within the organization. So promotions and things like that.
As you think about your own development and when you made those sort of big steps forward, what was the largest contributor of it, other than hard work and, putting in the time?
Yeah, I go back to the mentor. The professor ended up being a mentor to me, the one that was helping me think differently about business. You going back to, like, I still have that relationship today, where we still communicate today. I guess what really drew me to him was, in school, I'm there for a purpose. I'm already a family man, so I'm going to school for a purpose. I sit in the front row. Nobody sits in the front row. So I sit in the front row of the class and I'm answering questions. Like I'm raising my hand. And so that intrigued him and that kind of drew us together. And so a mentorship formed as I started, going to KPMG, and, he kind of went the public accounting route. So a lot of things to avoid, to do, not to do, so I'd say definitely a mentor. One of my professors started as a professor, mentor, and is still a good friend to this day.
Do you know you're headed to industry at this point? Are you already thinking, like so many within the public accounting houses, they stay a few years and then they look for a corporate, to step into a corporate role, corporate finance role somewhere, whether it's an assistant controller or a controller or what have you? It's a common path. Was it, or was that on your radar yet, or were you thinking differently?
Yeah, that was definitely on my radar. I had no desire to become a partner. At the time, I had no desire to work the tremendous amount of hours we were working, 7 days a week in some cases. That's not what I wanted to do long term, especially at that time. Like I said, I had young kids, so I had kids early. Yeah. So I wanted to spend more time with my kids. So I really went that route because of my mentor was like, you do this, get it over with. I'm telling you, this will help you throughout the rest of your career. And he was absolutely right. For me, it was always a stepping stone. I didn't know what industry I wanted to go. Actually, I wanted to go into some kind of construction industry on the finance side because of my background. I really liked the blue collar aspect of it.
So what's the next move? Where's life beyond KPMG? Where do you land?
Right after KPMG, I went to Quest Diagnostics, and it was in Lyndhurst at the time. And I went from external auditing to internal auditing. That was right around the time when Sarbanes-Oxley hit, and all the public companies were scrambling, trying to get their documentation together. So at that time, external auditors, we were a hot commodity with the public companies. So they were scooping us up left and right and putting a nice premium on that. So that was a good time to transition into internal audit. And the way we were set up, we had 8 seniors and 2 managers and 1 director. So we would have 2 jobs at a time, 4 seniors on each job, and we were all the same level, but each job, 1 senior had to step up and be the lead senior. So that was the most, I'd say, difficult thing to do when you're a leader on specific jobs in rotation. Because now I'm leading this job. We're going to do these things this way. We kind of got our plan, but I manage this way. And then the next job, I'm not the leader. I'm back to being just a senior. And so leading your peers when you're not necessarily their direct manager is more difficult than when you're their manager, because there's that hierarchy is not at stake. So I would say during those times when we're doing those audits, having to lead my peers was probably the most influential. That kind of really made me think about leading, because you pick up a lot from them as well. How did they lead the engagement? So that really started to shape my thinking as a leader. Fast forward, I would say what catapulted my thinking as a leader would have to be when I was in middle management. I decided to go back to school and get my MBA. The same mentor advised me, why don't you try to get into the executive MBA program rather than just a traditional MBA? And at the time, I was kind of young to be applying for the executive MBA program, but being the person he is, he kind of pulled some strings for me. So I was able to get into the executive MBA program, which is much different than your traditional MBA program, where I was in class with, it was 66 of us. So I was in class with 65 either executives or people that were on their way to becoming executives. So I had, and for 2 years I had, and still now, but for 2 years I had access to, CEOs, entrepreneurs who were presidents, I had presidents, directors, CFOs.
So suddenly your network is just expanded exponentially.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, there's a lot of team collaboration that goes on in these types of programs, I'd imagine. That's something you didn't have really. Even when you were studying accounting undergrad, it wasn't the same as that type of experience. Was it also better suited with the family, or are you doing this nights and weekends, or how is that
Yeah.
working?
So the executive program was every other Friday and Saturday, all day Saturday, every other Friday, all day, every other Friday. Yeah, so it was intense. It was hard going back to my wife and saying, hey, are you okay if I do this?
Yeah, I'll have to say, if nothing else, we know two things about you. You must be highly disciplined given all of what it takes to hold down a job, study nights and weekends, and raise a family. And so highly disciplined. And the other is that you found a good match for yourself, perhaps. Want to know how your outlook maybe has changed in terms of professionally, what are you looking for now? Where is this going to take you?
Sure. Immediately stepping out of that program, I felt I was in position to be a controller. I feel like I had the criteria fit to be a controller. I was a finance manager at the time, promoted multiple times, and I just knew I was ready for that controller's role. And so that was my goal. I was just, applying for several different controller jobs or VP of finance jobs. And one organization took a chance on me. It happened to be a nonprofit organization. I was a little hesitant because the stigma with nonprofits are, maybe it's government, or they don't work as hard, or the pay is not as good, and there's a lot of stigma with nonprofit organizations. But this one was different. The CFO was just starting, and she was looking for someone who had public experience to bring that rigor to the nonprofit organization. So the control aspect, policies, procedures. She was looking for someone who had a lot of the rigorous for-profit mentality to bring that type of structure to the organization.
Now, do you recall that relationship? Was it a recruiter that helped you connect, or was it part of your network through a relationship in the network we were just talking about? Or how did you come in contact with that company?
It was a recruiter. I had logged on with a couple of different recruiters. So a recruiter, called me up about the position. Like I said in the beginning, I was a little hesitant because of the stigma. But she insisted that I talk to the CFO, at least talk to someone in HR, at least, have the conversation. And so I did. And a lot of the stigmas that I thought were there were not necessarily true. And the CFO herself was coming from financial services, out of the financial services world.
So pretty sophisticated in the finance world background anyway. You stay there a number of years, or was it a good stretch, or what was your tenure there?
Yeah, I stayed 5 years in the organization. Went through a couple different CFOs during the tenure. And in fact, while I was there, I was interim CFO during my stint there. It gave me a taste of that world, and I knew at that point I was going to do what I needed to do to being a CFO.
It allowed you to understand that you could advance into that role. Maybe part of you doubted it. Maybe you thought you needed more time. And I don't know if it was 6 months in the role or what it might have been, but it gave you that type of confidence that you could do it.
Maybe a little more than that, but that was my mentality. Like, I could do this. I could learn how to operate in this role. I always reach back to that network. Always go back to that group, and I'm always asking questions, thoughtful questions to them. How can I add value to this position? And that was something I would do in any position, but this one in particular was, I wanted to show that I was capable of being the full-time CFO. And so, I would go and one of the things that talking to my network was, the age-old question: what keeps you up at night as the CFO? And as I started explaining things that I knew going on with the organization, because I had been there for a number of years, someone suggested that we do a stress test. That I bring this up to the organization at the executive level, that we do a stress test and basically see what would happen if certain things in the organization, if certain things in the organization were to happen. So if we lost the CEO, what would happen with the organization? He was very critical to our fundraising efforts. We had a lot of large donors. Well, what would happen if one of our largest donors decides they don't want to donate or cut the donation drastically? We didn't have a playbook for any of that. And so I introduced this to the senior team, and they bought on and went out, got consultants.
Scenario planning type of exercise?
Yes. Scenario planning and trying to put, in some cases, putting dollar amounts to those scenarios. What happens if we get negative press, so different types of things. And then, I reached out to them and I got a whole bunch of other different scenarios from the different leaders that we could explore. And that was a valuable piece of information that the organization didn't have prior to me being the CFO. I actually thought that was going to cement my sort of role as the actual CFO. But what it did was it gave the organization a blueprint of what we would need to do in the event this happened. Fortunately, we had to use it. We did get a huge cut from a donor, a large donor, and so we had a plan for that. What we didn't have a plan for, and I had left that by this time, was a pandemic. So when the pandemic hit, it immediately thought back. I thought, okay, what are we going to do? Hopefully, there were some things in the work that we produced that at least helped get through some of the pandemic, like working from home and that kind of stuff.
Now, you've been a senior finance executive, a number of different organizations, not-for-profits. You're a controller, head controller. It's obvious that your next step is to enter the CFO office, and you do it at an organization with a highly recognizable marquee, the National Geographic Society. We might have a few more career-related questions for you a little later in the podcast during the mentoring round, but right now I'd like to find out about this organization. I think we all are familiar with it, or we think we know it. There might be a number of organizations under that umbrella. I don't know. You can explain it to us, Rob. Tell us about the National Geographic Society.
Sure. So what people do know of the society is it's a very old organization. So it actually started in 1888. It's always been a nonprofit organization. So the organization, even when from formation, it's been a nonprofit organization. It didn't always perform as a nonprofit organization because it had a bunch of media assets, the magazine, the TV. Now there's apps, there's photographs, there's all these things. In 2015, the organization decided to sell its media assets to 21st Century Fox, which they had already had a relationship with putting media platforms out there. With that, selling the media assets to 21st Century Fox at the time allowed it. They paid us a nice sum of money to go into our endowment, so that put our endowment over $1 billion instantly. And then we still own the yellow border. So the yellow border you see behind, we own that as a brand. So for them to use that, they license that from us. So we get a license fee for that. We own our buildings. So the buildings you see that you walk past, we own those buildings outright. And we rent space out to the employees so when the split happened, National Geographic Society kept its name. The new entity became National Geographic Partners, which National Geographic Society owns 27% of. 21st Century Fox owned the other 73%. Disney has since bought 21st Century Fox, so Disney now owns that 73% of National Geographic Partners. So we're partners with Disney in this entity. So you might see, you might see the National Geographic logo on Disney Plus or on things that Disney promote. And that's because we're in a partnership with National Geographic Partners, which is a for-profit organization. We also get distribution payments from that partnership. So there's a lot of revenue that comes into the society from having this partnership exist.
Very interesting. So, and I want to point out, Rob pointed to sort of a frame behind him. The yellow frame sits on the console behind him as if a picture frame, nothing in the middle, but the yellow border that we're so familiar with is framed on the desk. Yeah, that's a remarkable arrangement, I have to say, for any not-for-profit. This is so unusual, I would think. Curious, just to clarify, it's a not-for-profit, but it has this partnership. Where the money from the partnership, does that go in the endowment, or am I misunderstanding?
The money from the partnership is unrestricted revenue that we could use for any purpose we want. Between rental income, the licensing income, the distribution income, and then our policy to draw down on our endowment, that covers a significant amount or all of our overhead plus programmatic work. And that was one of the reasons why there was never a huge push to raise money, because there's a decent amount of money coming in from those streams. However, being a nonprofit organization, we should be raising money. We should be, getting contributions. We should be soliciting donors. And that has been the shift of the organization in the past couple years. We are actually, one of our models is becoming an organization, a philanthropic organization, building a culture of philanthropy. Because with that, with our brand and being able to raise money, we can tell our donors that 100% of your contribution goes to programmatic work, because we have enough revenue in coming from other places that we don't need to use your funds to pay like my salary.
Can you share with us the nature of the programmatic work, different programs I'm assuming that you're in, the society's involved in today? What is that type of work?
So we tout ourselves on being, using the power of science, exploration, education, and storytelling to illuminate the wonder of our world. So those are the main pillars of our program work: storytelling, um, science and innovation, education, and then our explorer engagement. So our explorer community is is what sets us apart from other maybe like-minded organizations, other environmental type organizations, is we have this community of explorers that they feed off each other, and we fund a lot of their work. And that's the work that you may see end up in some of these magazines. You may see end up on the channel TV shows and things like that. So
it's like you underwrite some of the explorers and some of the scientists or the professionals that are carrying on that National Geographic tradition that we're familiar with on, from the past programming.
That is correct.
But it's underwritten by you folks. But you're not producing media assets from those explorations, right? Or are you? I mean, isn't that what you allow Disney now to do for you?
Well,
or
that's the National Geographic partners. That's the connection. They're still the ones that are doing the media. Our guys can take the pictures, but we don't have the magazine. So we can tell the story, we can give them photos, we can give them content, but the media side, this National Geographic partners, they're the ones who take what we do and amplify our mission to the millions and millions of followers that they have.
So there's an explorer, he's doing like wonderful work. The societies, the not-for-profit part of the business is behind them. We want to absolutely underwrite your next exploration. But then the partnership over here says, we've already done enough with him. Let's not do that.
Happens all the time. happens all the time. I mean, we do so much work that it can't all get into a magazine, and
right.
It can't all get into a story. But doing the work itself may not be as sexy as to the audience. By saying, we preserved a certain acreage of land, so that, or just say a certain area of the ocean where there's no more, you're not allowed to fish. The government restricted this area for fishing, and it allows that area to grow, the reefs to grow, and marine life to flourish in that area. The actual government putting the restriction on land, it's not the sexy part. The sexy thing is our divers going in there, finding sharks, seeing sharks, and seeing what sharks do. That's the kind of thing that ends up. Those are the kind of things that ends up in that.
Like a explorer naturalist will want to study something or go to a part of the world to better explore and expose perhaps a situation, environmental situation of some kind. Do they, I don't want to say pitch, but do they, do they look for you? Do they send you a proposal saying we'd love to have you underwrite this? Or I'm sure my nomenclature is completely wrong, however it's expressed, but is that sort of what happens? Like these professional naturalists and explorers have an idea that they can have an impact in this part of the world if they can just get the story out there, and they ask you folks to underwrite it? Or is that not the way it works?
That's not the way it works. That is one of the ways that it may work. We have several different funding opportunities, and we grant money. So I guess the word underwriting it's not necessarily the right word, but
you grant it.
We grant monies out, and there's different levels of granting. You have young explorers, people who have barely no funding. They're just starting out. They just need a shot. And so there's a process. There's an application process. They get to explain what they're trying to do. we may grant them, a few dollars to expand on what they're doing. You have more seasoned folks that are working on something and they need to expound. They want to make the project bigger. They do. We have a grant process for that, a grant application for that. So they would apply for a grant to expound on what they're doing. And then we have what we call our Zenith programs, which are 3 big programs that they're fully they're mature, they're huge, and we invest a lot of funds in those programs. But they too come up with new ideas within those programs. But there's different levels of category levels. So someone could come to us and say, "Hey, I have this great idea." We don't just listen to the idea. It's like you got to go through the grant process.
As you described, this organization is adopting more philanthropic best practices. It's becoming a much more mature philanthropic organization. And my question for you is, well, what does that mean about the finance function? What does the finance function need to be tasked with? What does it need to step up and do that perhaps it wasn't as sophisticated in the past to complete such a mission?
A few things. So with the addition of bringing on new revenues from a contribution standpoint, that comes with donor engagement. So we have to make sure we have the proper staff to engage those donors, to make sure we're reporting correctly what we're doing with their funds. And even before that, we're going through a phase now where we're adding our staff, we're building up our staff in preparation of having more funds to grant out, having more programs. So we have to build our staff. As finance, we have to make sure we're watching that balance between growing our staff and the funds that are coming in, because there's still a delicate balance on what we can do for programming, what we need for support costs. So we're growing, but we have to watch how, we're growing really fast. And that's something new the organization has not had to do in its history. We've already grown since I've been here over 25% staffing. And that's probably only half of the staff that we're trying to bring on. So we're trying to grow our staff like 50% in a couple years. So going from about 400 to over 600 employees in a couple of years.
What about when it comes to visibility and your lines of sight into the numbers? Has that improved? Have you, do you use scorecards or what's that? Dashboards today, excuse me. Yeah, are they part of your world? And what are the numbers that you're trying to put in front of people? Make sure they're aware of this.
The main thing we do is staffing is our biggest cost. Staffing and our grants. Those are our two biggest buckets. So we're always trying to get different metrics about our staffing, how much we're spending on our staff, and as well as where we are in our programmatic work from a grant perspective.
Can you see that staffing? I mean, can you see, a lot of finance leaders recently have talked about how they keep a close eye on churn. Here you are trying to staff up and you can't afford to lose people under those circumstances. Do you have visibility into employee churn or net new hires, or how are you able to keep a read on that?
We do. We actually just had a meeting yesterday, and our turnover rate is less than 10% over the last couple of years, which is pretty good considering what you were mentioning with other organizations. So we do keep an eye out on that. We have an internal group that all they do is deal with metrics, different types of metrics for the organization. So we do a ton of surveys for our employees to gauge where they are, their sentiment. I think that ratcheted up since the pandemic. We really need to know how our employees feel working remotely. All these things. So we've done a lot of surveying. So we kind of got a pulse on our employees from that aspect. Just I guess asking the right questions. What's important to them, and honestly, as leaders, being really flexible and forgiving, because allowing pretty much your whole staff to work remotely is a big deal.
Is that have you changed a philosophy during the pandemic, where before remote workers were a very limited number, and since the pandemic, perhaps the organization has realized it's easy to function remotely if we do it correctly anyway, or no? What would you tell us about the mindset when it comes to the remote world?
I won't tell you we figured it out, because we have not. We've actually stumbled through a couple of different iterations of how this would work. I think the first one was 3 days a week, and it was a combination. I think Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Went survey, and the staff didn't really appreciate that, didn't really like that. So now we've settled on 2 days a week. Wednesday is the if you're a hybrid employee, we have three designations: remote, hybrid, and resident. Resident means you can't perform your job unless you're on site. If you're a security guard or something like, you have to be there.
Sure.
Most of our workers are hybrid, which they'll be in the office 2 days a week, at least 2 days a week. They can come in more if they'd like. And we try to use those 2 days that they're in the office as collaboration days, like meetings with multiple groups, different groups across the different divisions. So we try to limit those 2 days of meetings with cross-functional or multi-group sessions, so that you can have those collaborations in person. And then on Mondays, and Fridays, you can have like a lot of your individual one-on-one meetings with teams or whomever.
Part of what I think you explained to us is happening, that National Geographic Society will become more, I don't want to use the word aggressive, but it's going to be out there more looking for donors and to raise money, which maybe, and correct me, it hadn't traditionally done, or it plans to just increase the number of donors as it takes this not-for-profit posture. And I guess my question is that there's a lot of cost associated sometimes with reaching out to those types of donors. It seems like you'd have to do more affairs, raise the profile among those who donate money by sponsoring things or holding fundraisers and luxury facilities around the world. Don't know, but am I right about that? Or is there, those things, the donors don't, you got to go to where they are.
That is correct. And being in a pandemic has not helped. That. But I mean, greatly enough, we've been able to set a couple of records in donations and contributions. In 2021, it was the highest year in contributions we've had. We're looking to beat the 2021 numbers in 2022. We're off to a really good start. We have a new advancement chief advancement officer who actually started on the same day that I did. So we're kind of tied at the hip, both for work and for our anniversary. And just changing what our CEO did, just changing the whole mindset on how we do business, because we have such a strong platform to stand on from a revenue standpoint. We have such a strong brand to stand on, because the organization has been around for forever, and it's known. The philanthropic piece is a change in mindset for a lot of the employees that were there, that have been there for years. But for some of us folks like me, that's what I'm used to. So this is kind of getting back to like in the wheelhouse of donor stewardship and those things. And yes, it does cost money, but we're in a favorable position to invest in our advancement, invest in our staff, invest in our underlying systems and technology. So when we come out of this pandemic, we're ready to go.
So I have to jump to what we refer to as our finance strategic moment question. I don't know if you saw this in our notes, but sort of a question we always pose to finance leaders. Doesn't have to be about National Geographic Society. It might have happened earlier in your career. What we're looking for is, one finance strategic moment where you had a moment of insight as a finance executive or leader that led you to avoid a risk, pursue an opportunity. It might have allowed you to modify the outlook of the organization. Don't know, but does anything come to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
In times of inflation and recession, and I think you mentioned this earlier, a lot of organizations are pulling back, cutting costs, where we see this, and this was something that I've talked about. We're a nonprofit organization. Most nonprofit organizations are needed more when times are bad, and so if we have the means, we should be investing more in our people, investing more in our infrastructure, investing more into our people, so that when we come out of this, whatever this is, this recession, that we're in a much better place, and we can replenish our balance sheet. We have a strong balance sheet. We can replenish that. Let's not be afraid to use what we've built as a reserve to actually use it when it's needed. So getting the organization in that mindset is a tough challenge, because the first thing you want to do is start cutting, whether it's cutting the programs, cutting staff. We do look at that. I mean, we are mindful of that, but I'm of the mind that because we have the means, let's double down and expand while everyone else is contracting. And then once we kind of emerge out of this, we're ready to go.
Hi, it's Jack. I hope you're enjoying our talk with CFO Rob Young of the National Geographic Society. During our mentoring round on this episode, Rob will talk about the development of the property. The National Geographic Society has long had this property, this campus in Washington, D.C. They plan to create more of an experience for visitors, so this is not just an office complex. It's something much more that they want to serve the public with. And Rob will share some of the details during today's mentoring round. So let's return to our episode. We're going to jump to our mentoring round, where I'm going to ask you several quick questions intended to inspire and inform future finance leaders. 2 years ago, you stepped into the CFO office. We want you to think back to that first 30 days. And if there's a piece of advice you would give yourself that first 30 days you took on the CFO role, that responsibility fell on your shoulders for the first time. There are some things you knew. There are some things maybe you didn't expect. Don't know. But if you could go back in time and just whisper something in your ear when you took on the role that first 30 days, what would it be?
That this pandemic wasn't going to be a couple of months, that it was going to be a couple of years. I wish that was
That's clever.
that was something I definitely didn't see as coming in as the CFO. That's probably the biggest one, and then all the consequences that's starting to happen because of that, with inflation and, the recession, all the recession talks. So I definitely want myself today to be able to warn myself 30 days in that this pandemic and, working remotely and not really, like, it took me a while to even meet my staff in person, right? So
we always like to ask our guests also to reflect a little on the personal side of things. We want to know if you have a personal habit or part of a daily routine that you're known for, something, Rob does. That's just what Rob does. It doesn't have to be about the office environment, really. It might be something a family member would point out to us. That's how Rob does it. Is it a habit or part of a daily routine that you have? Anything?
yeah, and my wife hates when I say this, but I say I always want to work smarter, not harder. And that comes from whether I'm mowing the lawn or fiddling with a spreadsheet. If we can improve processes and eliminate time spent doing things, like things that don't take a lot of effort or a lot of mental capacity, then let a process do that, so then I can actually spend my time thinking about what I need to be thinking about in the future, what I should be looking for in the future, not worrying about putting these 3 reports together to get the report that I need to look at. Automate. I'm a fan of process improvement, whether it's at home, whether it's in the office, and it drives my wife crazy. It probably drives my employees crazy because I'm always talking about it. But
Hey, can I ask, how old are they today? Just you shared with us how they were part of your climbing the ladder from the very start. One imagines they're almost nearly grown, or
no, they're adults. I have a 25-year-old son and a 21-year-old daughter, and she's entering her senior year in college. He's through college working.
Well, congratulations. That's a milestone in itself for your parenting years are almost behind you. Or of course, they're never behind you, I guess.
Yeah, but I get it. They're there.
We'd like to ask if you have a book recommendation for us.
Read a lot of journals. I read a lot of magazines. I listen to podcasts, things that are shorter.
What about a podcast? What do you listen to?
One I recently started listening to was called The Pivot.
Oh yeah, Pivot. Yeah.
EYL. It's Earn Your Leisure. It's like a personal finance type. Thankful for the person who invented audiobooks, because that has got me into back into books, and with the commute back and forth to DC, it's an opportunity to listen to books, and so I've read or listened to A Promised Land, by Barack Obama. And the reason for that, like I tend to gravitate towards books where I can see myself in sort of the character and I want to kind of know their journey or what they've been through, and how can it help me be a better person, be a better leader. So I read that book, and I mean, just reading, going through the section where he comes into office and there's a financial crisis, and he's got to get through that. Like, that was like, things like that are inspiring to me. So I definitely would recommend that book.
Yeah, interesting. Looking back to that moment in time now. Test of leadership was just waiting for him as he arrives, as he comes through the door. So thank you for that. We are going to come to our final question. We'd like you to look forward for us and tell us what your priorities are as CFO over the next 12 months. What are your CFO priorities over 12 months?
Sure. One of the priorities is, and I don't know how I got through this whole interview without mentioning our plans for our campus. We're unofficially broken ground on a $250 million project for our base camp, where we're building out our museums to build 2 huge immersive experiences. We're building out the museum. We're building out our retail store, our restaurant. We're building out our pavilion.
For those who might not be aware, tell us where that National Geographic Society campus is.
It's in the heart of DC, actually a few blocks from the White House. We're located on M Street between 16th and 17th Street. We're blowing out our campus. We're making a huge pavilion. There's going to be this nighttime show that we're going to put on every night. We're going to use our buildings as part of the show. The ground where it's going to illuminate the whole courtyard. So that's a huge project that we're undertaking. That was another thing that 30 days in, if they would have told me we were going to do this project.
Back to your construction roots.
It's construction related, so I am excited about it. But that's a huge lift for, from a budget standpoint, and making sure we're on budget.
Rob Young, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
This has been awesome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hello, listeners. Do us a favor. Be certain to subscribe to CFO Thought Leader on Apple Podcasts, or if you're an Android user, check us out on Spotify or Google Play. If you like the show, please recommend it to a friend.